Imagine Earth billions of years ago. The continents as we know them didn't exist. There was just one massive landmass called Pangaea. Over millions of years, this supercontinent slowly broke apart. The pieces drifted across the Earth's surface. This process, called plate tectonics, shaped our world. Africa, the second largest continent, emerged from this ancient dance. It formed the heart of Pangaea. As the landmasses separated, Africa remained relatively stationary. It became a continent of vast plains, towering mountains, and scorching deserts. Its unique geography would shape the destiny of its people. The Nile River, the longest river in the world, snakes through the northeastern part of Africa. It provided a lifeline for civilizations to flourish. To the south, the Sahara Desert, the largest hot desert, stretches across the continent. It created a formidable barrier, separating North Africa from the rest of the continent.
Along the fertile banks of the Nile River, one of the world's earliest civilizations emerged, ancient Egypt. The Egyptians were masters of agriculture, harnessing the annual floods of the Nile to irrigate their crops. They developed a complex system of writing, mathematics, and astronomy. The Egyptians built magnificent pyramids, temples, and monuments that still stand today. These structures are a testament to their ingenuity and architectural prowess. They left behind a rich legacy of art, culture, and knowledge that continues to fascinate us. South of Egypt, in present-day Sudan, another great civilization thrived: Nubia. The Nubians were skilled traders and warriors. They controlled important trade routes connecting Egypt to sub-Saharan Africa. They also developed their own unique culture with distinctive pottery, jewelry, and religious practices. Farther south, in what is now Zimbabwe, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe stand as a testament to the architectural achievements of another ancient African civilization. This city, built between the 11th and 15th centuries, was a major trading center. The people of Great Zimbabwe were skilled builders and craftsmen. They constructed massive stone walls, intricately designed without mortar, that have stood the test of time. They traded gold, ivory, and other goods with distant lands. Around the same time that Great Zimbabwe flourished, a group of people speaking Bantu languages began to migrate across sub-Saharan Africa. This Bantu migration had a profound impact on the continent. It led to the spread of agriculture, ironworking, and new languages.
For centuries, the Sahara Desert seemed like an insurmountable barrier. However, intrepid traders found ways to cross this vast expanse. They established trade routes that connected North Africa to the kingdoms of West Africa. Camels, known as the ships of the desert, played a vital role in this trans-Saharan trade. These trade routes were not just about commerce. They were also conduits for the exchange of ideas, culture, and religion. Islam, which had spread across North Africa in the 7th century, made its way south along these trade routes. The kingdoms of West Africa, such as Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, grew wealthy from the trans-Saharan trade. They controlled the gold mines that supplied much of the world's gold. These kingdoms flourished as centers of learning, art, and Islamic scholarship. Section 5. The Rise of Faith, Islamic Empires, and Their Influence. The arrival of Islam in Africa had a profound impact on the continent. It spread rapidly across North Africa, bringing with it a new religion, language, and culture. Islamic scholars established centers of learning, such as Timbuktu in present-day Mali, which became renowned for their scholarship. Islamic empires, such as the Almoravid dynasty and the Almohad Caliphate, rose to power in North Africa. They extended their influence across the Mediterranean into Europe. These empires left behind a rich legacy of art, architecture, and scholarship. The spread of Islam in Africa was not without its conflicts. However, it also led to a flourishing of trade, scholarship, and cultural exchange. It connected Africa to a wider world.
Section 6. A Dark Chapter. The Transatlantic Slave Trade. The transatlantic slave trade stands as one of the darkest chapters in human history. For over 4 centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic Ocean to work as slaves in the Americas. This brutal trade had a devastating impact on Africa. European powers, driven by greed and a belief in their own superiority, established slave trading posts along the African coast. They exploited existing conflicts and rivalries among African societies to acquire slaves. African rulers who participated in the slave trade shared in the blame for this tragedy. The transatlantic slave trade robbed Africa of its people, its resources, and its dignity. It left a legacy of trauma and injustice that continues to affect the continent today. Section 7. The Scramble for Africa, European Colonization and its Legacy. In the late 19th century, European powers, driven by a desire for raw materials and new markets, embarked on a scramble for Africa. Within a few decades, they had carved up most of the continent among themselves. Only Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent. European colonization had a profound and often devastating impact on Africa. Colonial powers exploited Africa's resources for their own benefit. They imposed their own systems of government, education, and culture. They drew arbitrary borders that divided ethnic groups and created conflict. The legacy of colonialism continues to cast a long shadow over Africa. It left the continent with weak institutions, underdeveloped economies, and a legacy of ethnic conflict.
Section 8. Fight for Freedom. Independence movements and key figures. Despite the challenges they faced, Africans never stopped resisting colonial rule. In the aftermath of World War II, independence movements gained momentum across the continent. Africans, inspired by the ideals of self-determination, demanded an end to colonial rule. Key figures emerged to lead the struggle for independence. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and many others dedicated their lives to freeing their countries from colonial rule. These leaders used a variety of tactics, from peaceful protests to armed struggle, to achieve their goals. Their courage and sacrifice paved the way for a new era in Africa. Section 9. The Winds of Change. Post-colonial Africa and its challenges. The 1960s witnessed a wave of independence movements across Africa. One by one, African nations broke free from colonial rule. However, the transition to independence was not always smooth. Many African countries faced significant challenges. Cold War rivalries often spilled over into Africa as the United States and the Soviet Union vied for influence. Ethnic conflicts, exacerbated by colonial borders, erupted in many parts of the continent. Corruption and mismanagement hindered economic development. Despite these challenges, African nations persevered. They began to build new institutions, develop their economies, and forge their own destinies.
Section 10. Africa Today. A continent of progress and potential. Africa today is a continent of immense diversity, dynamism, and potential. It is home to a growing population, a burgeoning middle class, and a vibrant cultural scene. African nations are making significant progress in areas such as education, healthcare, and economic development. However, challenges remain. Poverty, inequality, conflict, and climate change continue to pose serious threats. African nations are working to address these challenges and create a brighter future for their people. Section 11. Looking ahead. Africa's future on the global stage. Africa is a continent on the rise. Its young population, abundant resources, and strategic location position it to play an increasingly important role in the 21st century. African nations are embracing innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship to drive progress. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, Africa's voice on the global stage will only grow stronger. African nations are working together to address shared challenges and promote peace, security, and development. The future of Africa is bright with promise.